Hi friends, Eric again. It's been I don't know how many months. I think 3. I think the last time was like right at the beginning of January. Should be because I didn't really have to change anything here at the top. Well, I did add some things. Anyway, hi, I'm talking about my video game again because sometimes you have to do these things because you have to and feel like it. And I guess you could make an argument that it makes sense for like user engagement or something. The world isn't very nice right now, but we are still doing the things we have been doing and will continue to do so until it is not possible anymore. Let's just start talking about other things. Witches Heaven, a video game that is, wow, approaching its first anniversary already because time moves. It is on sale. Again, and still for like a few more days. I don't know how many. I think 3. I think the Steam sale, the spring thing, goes until the 26th, but I might be wrong. So you better go and check and buy the game. Write a positive review if you haven't already. That would be nice. And also if you have a Steam curator list, maybe put it on there with a recommendation. I recently put one of my games in the No Ice in Minnesota bundle on itch, and after that some kind of like weird like cop-loving fascist Steam curator, I think, put every game developer who was in that bundle and who had games on Steam on like some kind of weird curator list. And now I have to keep looking at it every time I open up that list, and it is deeply annoying. It is also sort of funny that they, who knows the gender of that person, they put GB Rober on there saying, oh yeah, that's like this developer's doing anti-cop propaganda. Yes, I am. Been doing that for a few years now. Anyway, it's annoying. It's awful that you have to deal with this kind of stuff on Steam, and you know how useless Steam is and how useless the world at large is at like doing anything against what's going on. But yeah, let's talk about what I've been doing and not think about the other things. Anyway, fun performative labor. These are these things here. Writing a review, doing a curator. You know, the things you do just to appease the system you're stuck in. I think that's like what performative labor is used for as a term. It's related to something else I've been thinking about and that I still need to write. But anyway, like I'm going forward. I'm talking about JRPG game. I really am, and I really want to. It's interesting because one problem I have, I honestly forgot to do these videos at some point because I was pretty busy with a lot of things, and one of them was working on the game, but also other things. And the fun thing is that there's a lot that has happened with that game, but it's all like because it's like it happened over like 3 months, and a lot in general happened over the last 3 months in like some way, or like, but not really, but it did. Is I have problems recalling details of like, okay, I did this and now I did that, and this is how these things fit together and all of that. So I'm not even gonna try to do that. So let's just summarize everything. This extension that I mentioned, I think in the last video, or like some of these earlier, like previous videos, this extension to like the dungeon test I mentioned is done completely. So there are now 2 dungeons, and there's like a small overworld section, and there are locations you can explore, and there are scenes you can play out, and like get like short stories that you can read that talk a little bit, or like show things that the characters are doing, and all of these things basically, or like most of what I would like to show like in a full version of this game exists in some form or another, like some in like a fairly rough and not very elaborate state, others however are like in a pretty like solid state. I'll talk about that later, what that means. And it's I like it a lot. The entire process of working on this has been incredibly fun for me, and like very often to suddenly see like things I worked on, I don't know, last year in September or like in August or in October, and that I prepared for like very specific things, to now have like several instances where I use these systems, where I use these foundations to like actually have them do the things what I like for like why I've built them like that is just great. And it's just the problem I have when I start talking about this, and like the few people who had the misfortune of like getting me to talk about it, is that there's like a lot in my brain that like just then wants to come out. Ooh, let me talk about like monster cooking, and let me talk about world magic and how the spreadsheet work and how cool it is, and how quickly I can build attacks and I can build enemies, and how quickly I can change things, and how like easy it is for me to like come up with encounter designs and all of these things, and how nice it is to have like systems that like quickly let you build the things that you want to make. Is just great. But yeah, that's like I'm always running long with these anyway, and I don't want to like go on for like much longer, especially if there's not really much that I can directly show or want to directly show. So yeah, that part is done. Also one thing, and I'll probably link to it in the video description, one thing I did in mid to late February to March was someone made a game jam about making games in RPG Maker 2003, with the rule being you have to use like pre-made maps that the jam creator has made. And I generally like this idea of giving people a shared set of like rules, or like a shared set of like constraints, and then just see how different people are using these shared assets, like and what comes out of this. And I'll link to the jam in general, also like to my game, but it is frankly incredible to see the amount of like variation you got in this thing, while everyone still kind of like kept to like the original premise of it, is like you have to use like the maps that are in the project file and cannot really build any more of them. You could however like make enemies and all of that other stuff, and so there was like still a lot of room for complexity, obviously, because like a map is not everything. But it was really nice, and especially like for me, to first of all make a game in something that isn't Game Maker for the first time in I don't know how long, like way over a decade, to see how RPG Maker 2003 works and how frustrating it sometimes was to work with, especially if you have like, and you like it, those who watched this and may have played like this JRPG project of mine may have like gotten an idea of that I like weird quirky enemy attacks and enemy concepts, and obviously when I made this RPG Maker project, I like immediately thought about like, okay, what kind of like weird math abilities can I do in this? You can do weird math abilities in RPG Maker 2003. It is very painful to do, but you can do it. And I did that. So, and the concept for that project was to like basically to use that quote from the like dungeon encounters director that he said during like a PR interview, where you mentioned, the original Final Fantasy was built with 500 encounters because that's like how long it took to like play it in like one day, like in 12 hours, so that you could like reasonably, in quotes, put it into like a 1-day debug session. And I just said, okay, let's just take this idea and say you have 10 battles, and then you have to fight the final boss, and like build around that, and like had some other ideas. It was fun to just like try out some of like my ideas on like how to build encounters and how to build fights, and put them in action to like in a smaller context, and also then see people react to it. And it was really, really nice. The feedback that I got was mostly positive, or like completely positive, mostly completely. People had a good time. I had a chance to build like several like jokes in there. Big fan of the crap that pincer attacks you and announces that it's a pincer attack. I still giggle at that. Sometimes I boot up the game just to see that, giggle a little bit, and then I close it again. It's great. It also made me realize a few other things about like how like what I want these fights to be and how I want to present them, and what interests me about these things in general, and like about I learned a bit more about my general sensibilities about like character design and character progression and combat design, and how I want to frame and phrase and construct them. So in that sense, it was very, very helpful. Plus I got to make a tiny game in a very short amount of time, half of which I spent yelling at RPG Maker for being difficult. But it was fine. It was fine and it was fun. So yeah, like that's part of it. The extension is currently being playtested. By playtesting, I mean, so when I finally managed to do a full playthrough of it, of like we start at the first dungeon, go through everything until like the boss of the second dungeon, took me around like an hour and 20 minutes. Which is funny because it's like roughly what it would take me to play through Virtuous Heaven in one go, and that is a full commercial video game where you can also see like how much longer RPGs can be, like in general. So there's a lot of stuff in there. The problem right now, going from the feedback that I'm getting, is that a lot of people still kind of have trouble getting out of the first dungeon, which is fair because the game is very, I mean, the last video I did was like a detailed explanation about like how the combat system works and how the math works, and you can kind of see like, yeah, and like one person just said to me like, yeah, I played it for like 5 minutes just to check it out, and then I quickly realized, oh, this wants something from me and I need to take more time with it. So yeah, there's like a bit of room. Plus I made some choices regarding like how to teach players how to play the game, which is like I don't at first. There are tutorial fights. There are after the first dungeon. There are reasons why it's after the first dungeon. I will not further explain them, and I stand by them because I still think it's the correct choice. Also the fights, well, I don't know how much teaching there is if like you cannot run from an encounter and it's just like, okay, you figure it out. You're stuck in here until you figure it out. And I hope you learn something from it. So there's like a lot of work to be done still. I did provide like a fairly like big readme, and also like there are debug options that people can skip ahead and stuff like that. I actually built like a whole debug room first for myself, and then I noticed why don't I just give like people an option to enter there and like give themselves like items, levels, equipment, and like exits to like the specific areas in the game, so that they can at least explore them a little bit and see what's going on there. Once they lose patience. And also like in a way it's to be expected, both in terms of like where the game is and what it does, and also like that I very deliberately build it in such a way that it is not very easy to understand. That's, again, I wrote a thing about evil game design, and again, it's not about like being mean to players. It's more about being not being afraid of being obtuse, I guess, in a way, and in a way for me it's also like embracing this to a degree, and to just make it in such a way, and like make it so how I would like it all to be, and not really think too much about like, oh, is this too complicated, am I overloading the players with information, all these kinds of things, but just like build the systems and build the game, and then at some point in the far future figure out how the hell you're supposed to teach someone who isn't me to get around with it. And if this is tricky, well, then that's tricky. It's a problem for the future. But I really think it's a better approach for me to do, because, well, if I can only understand what I like and what I make, and so like building it like after my own sensibilities, I feel like is more prudent. And we'll see. And also, I'm fine if this ends up with a game that people hate, because, well, then I also did a job in like making sure that I like clearly communicated like what this is, and if people bounce off it and clearly bounce off it, I think that's also okay. Not everything has to be perfectly like you don't have to like be digestible for everyone in that sense. Like, not to go too deep, obviously there are like things with accessibility like on a broader scale that you have to talk about, but like in terms of like conceptual approach, that's a different kind of thing. Anyway, in general though, I'm like quite happy that like, even though a lot of people are saying, yeah, wow, this is a lot, like I played it for like 45 minutes, I still haven't gotten really out of the first dungeon, or like, yeah, I'm like at some point I just started cheating just to see what else is going on. Most of the people still are saying they like what's going on, or they like thinking about what's going on, and they find the concept, what it's trying to do, interesting, and how it's phrased and other things. So that's cool to see. It's also just funny to see how like people run into like the more like arcane aspects of it and like don't really know what's going on, like thinking something is a bug when it's just a status effect that you are under, like this kind of stuff. And again, these are like sometimes partially due to like lack of communication and other things. So, but there's some fun stuff going on. And yeah, like right now I'm like, yeah, well, I'll talk a bit about that. The game also has a name. I will not tell you. If you playtest the game, you will know the name, because it's on the main starting screen. But aside from that, it's a secret. When I got the idea for the name, I was like on a walk. I was like about 20 minutes away from home, and I couldn't stop giggling. Like, I was surrounded by people. I was just like grinning from ear to ear, because I was just so happy about it and about everything. And like, then I realized, wait a second, ooh, this name actually like works on like several layers, and it's like retains its like, no matter on like which layer you look at it, oh, there's something interesting here that's working. And it first started with me like, this sounds kind of cool, and sometimes it's funny how like these things kind of like work together sometimes. And yeah, I just have to repeat myself here. And maybe this is because I'm coming off like a very difficult game with Virtuous Heaven, where like for like until like the last, I don't know, 2 months, I hated working on it. I really hated working on it. And I'm like, it's still like, I don't even really like to like talk about like in terms of like promotion, because it's still like, I don't know. It does it what it does well, but it's like from the outset was such a struggle to make every single day, and it went on for years. So it is very strange to work on something, and no matter what it is, and no matter what like how complicated some of these things are that I've started working on, it is just pleasant it is just pleasant to work on. I really enjoy thinking about it. I really enjoy also challenging myself with, like, on a technical level with it, and it's really, it's fun to work on, and that's like one of those things is like, yeah, okay, I don't know how long this will take, but like something at some point will exist out of this, and well, yeah, but it's great. So let's talk a little bit about something else, and this is like one of the parts that I realized both when I made this RPG Maker project, but also a bit afterwards. I read a blog post about someone who described the differences between puzzles in video games and problems. If I can find it, I will also link it in the description. And I really like this idea and this notion of like a puzzle being something, basically being a like, lack of a better word, being a problem you're confronted with in a game, or like a challenge, or like a situation you're confronted with that you have to overcome, that you have to solve, but you're kind of like, you have the challenge in the puzzle then is to find the correct combination of the correct tool, the correct approach, the correct set of inputs to solve it in that sense. Right, if you think about like a point-and-click adventure puzzle, it is usually you have to find the correct items, you have to combine the correct items, maybe you have to like talk to the right people somewhere to like get to the correct area where you can then find the thing, and then you bring it to the place where you have to apply the item, and you earn progression. A puzzle game is like very often the same, where you're confronted with a situation and you have to, like, I don't know, bring a thing to a specific goal, and you have to do a very specific set of actions to bring the thing or your character to the goal in order to progress. You can also, and this is like this is where I started to think about like how I approach my action games, and like why I maybe sometimes like got into problems with these, is very often in action games you have a similar thing, like the very classical thing of like a puzzle. Obviously there are puzzle bosses, but like in a broader sense, like again the Mega Man weakness system, where you have a boss that has a very specific weapon that it's weak against, and if you like apply the correct weapon against that boss, you solve it more quickly, right? And you have it in platformers as well, and they don't even have to be puzzle platformers. You have like a lot of spikes in a specific set of platforms, and there's an expected set of moves you have to perform to get from your starting point to the end point. That too is a puzzle in that sense, because you have a situation and you have a predetermined set of actions that you have to perform to solve it. And the process here is like in the performing different actions and figuring out the correct action in that. The problem in this sense is you're in a situation and you have a set of tools, but these tools don't directly fit the solution that you're confronted with. So like for me, like for example, with this project, this RPG project that I'm working on, as I realized that I've suddenly gotten very dark on the camera. Oh well. in this RPG project, the battles, like the way the fights work, there are specific, obviously, like if you have an enemy, they're like it has specific stats, and it has specific lower stats where you can see, okay, these are kind of like the target points. Well, like, okay, you have to, I don't know, yeah, this enemy has a low metaphysical defense, so it's more likely and it would be more effective for you to target that defense with your actions and figure out, and this is already the point, figure out a way how to target this, because the tool set that the players have is a bit wonky. Some characters have moves that let you do that, others don't. But they're also like their stat distribution is wonky. For example, like the person who has, for example, like a or has the ability to get a metaphysical attack that they reliably can perform doesn't have the best metaphysical stat. So even though they have the attack, it might not be enough to actually do any damage, whereas the character with the highest stat doesn't have any like direct offensive capabilities unless you like do something about that. So it's not an ideal situation, and what you then have to do there is not to like find out the correct attack or the correct spell to overcome the thing, but to shift the battle and to shift your characters and your actions around what's available to you and what your goal is. But it's very often not an exact fit. It's a bit strange, and there's like variation in it depending on like what moves you have, what items you have, how much you know about the game and its inner workings and all these kinds of things, and you might be able to find several different like solutions to the same problem. And like a more like prominent example here might be like the Final Fantasy V. Once again, like I do like to come back to like the same 3 games, I guess, with my examples. Final Fantasy V with a job system where obviously there are bosses that are built around like specific things. There are bosses with elemental weaknesses. However, it is not guaranteed that you have a combination of jobs as like a player, because it has like over 20 or something that can directly attack that weakness. So you have to kind of like find a way around that. Or like depending on like which boss fight, there are like different pathways that are easier for your combination of jobs as opposed to like a different combination of jobs. And in that sense, it too is a game that treats battles more like problems that you have to solve and not like puzzles. There are in a way puzzle elements to them. Again, if you like look very directly at like, oh, again, this boss is weak to fire damage. Obviously, if you have the ability to deal fire damage, it's easy. Like, you just do that. But because it's not guaranteed that you have that, there's a bit more of like a room for exploration and room to like develop your own approach to things. And this is something I find very interesting. It's something I noticed. I kind of like read this article while I was in the final stages of like my RPG Maker project, I think, or like right as I finished it. And I noticed like, wait a second, this is kind of like how I've built these things. Like, for example, with the with my RPG Maker project, I knew, okay, you have 10 battles and then you have to fight a final boss. I need to make sure that you have like, or like the things I have to make sure of is characters should have like an appropriate level that they're able to kind of like withstand boss attacks and some way of dealing with them. But there wasn't really, and I didn't really want to have like a very clear path of like, okay, if you want to fight the moon, you have to have this ability to fight the moon. There are more obvious strategies that you can deploy, but there are also like some more stranger abilities and stranger things you can deploy. And the trick here was more to figure out like how to place these, how to distribute them, and then just let the players discover things themselves. And some people just like went for the simplest path, and that's fine. But others, like I saw this in comments that I got, like went back to it and like tried different approaches, tried to see if like what other abilities were out there in the game and how they could use those maybe to defeat the bosses and other things. And that's like the other side of like this type of approach of like building something where the fit isn't perfect between like the situation you have to overcome and the tools you have available to you is you can try at different times, and it's not like in the different the differences between each playthrough isn't really because of like some kind of randomization element, but it's because of like player interest of like, ooh, I wonder what happens if I try it like this. Would this also work? Can I make this work? How can I make this work? And I don't know, I like this type of approach and way of thinking more, and it's also like something, and this is something I have to really look into and not just say, but it is my impression that with some of the more like commercially successful like indie JRPG games, they very often don't tend to be like about fixing problems or like overcoming problems, and much more like quote unquote puzzle oriented. Or they're like very often this is like a thing with with games. Oh god. And so this is like something I'm just that I've been just thinking about a lot, about like or like understanding for me, like what I like to do is I like to present people with problems, and in a way this is also like something that happened in Virtua 7, where like I never really wanted to make a platformer where you had to like press the like right trigger at the right moment or else you would land in some spikes. It was always more about like, okay, you have this set of tools, here's a thing you have to move through. There are some like sometimes they're placed in such a way that like a specific route is encouraged, but it is never about like either you move like that or you have to reset. It was always about improvising things and like taking what you have and trying to make the best of it. And in a way this is like something I always try to do, and I honestly never really felt comfortable and feel comfortable if I like approach a fight or like approach a like situation in a game that I'm making with players need to have ability X to get past this, because then you run into problems of like, how do I teach this to players? And if this game is teaching me one thing, it's that like I do not like teaching people or like teaching players. Let's like you figure it out. It's all there. Just have an infinite amount of patience in these times. I don't know, but yeah, it's just something I find interesting to like observe in myself, and which frankly also helps me in like understanding of like what I want to build in general and what I don't want to build. I want to build problems. I don't want to build puzzles. And that's just good to know, because then it's easier to kind of like give yourself like kind of like a set of principles or like a set of rules of like how to do it. Or like for me, for example, the other thing is like I very often don't. It's the same with the RPG Maker project, but also here when I've been building enemies or like building abilities for characters that they learn, I mostly been thinking about these abilities in terms of like, do they make sense fictionally for the character, for who they are, and not as much of like, how useful is this gonna be? Because I don't know how useful it's gonna be. Like, this game is gonna be large for one reason or another. There are gonna be a lot of situations, and like, who knows, maybe someone will find a reason for like one ability, or like, for example, there was an ability where for a long time I thought, yeah, this is kind of useless, and then I realized, wait a second, no. Actually at the beginning it is very helpful to have that. So it shifts around depending on where you use it, when you use it, and what you like understand from that. So it's and again, this is like also cool for me making it, because I keep finding new interesting things that I can use and play around with, and develop like a new favorite way of playing my own video game, which is fun. Honestly, it's part of the why working on this is cool right now. But yeah, anyway, let's talk about what's next, which is like all of this that I just talked about. Oh, the big question is like, how can you pitch this to someone who has money and convince them to give me some of it? And that's gonna be fun. Like really fun, because wow. There are ways, and I'm definitely gonna try it. Like, honestly, I'm not very very optimistic about the whole process, but that's just like my decade-long cynicism about anything that involves me and like finding something that isn't welfare to give me money. It's the same with like job applications. It's like, yeah, apparently I'm not really able to like communicate like I should be hired, or like my project like deserves funding. So like there's always a good degree of like pessimism with me in this. Nevertheless, I'm still gonna try. So there are like things that I have to do for that, to like build a pitch deck and build a pitch and like all of this fun stuff. And again, like with the thing in the back of my mind, that like my very adamant, like being very adamant about like I will make not many compromises in terms of like what this game's gonna be, both structurally and thematically, and so getting this into like a commercial frame would be interesting, I think. Like figuring this out, and also like figuring out how to present this in such a way that someone can look at it and think, yeah, that you can make a commercial case for it. I think you can make one. I have to work out the specifics, but I think there's a path and a space for this, especially like considering what else is coming out right now, which is like frankly horrible in a lot of ways. So I think there's a space for like something that does things like a bit strangely. But yeah, I have to work this out, and like one of these things that I have to build is like make a timeline of like, okay, this is the state of the game, and like this is how long it's probably gonna take, and like this is how much money this will cost. So like you have to budget things, you have to think about like how many people would you hire, for how long, who, all things is like, God, fuck if I know, at least right now. And the other part with like building a timeline is most of my games were built with me going, okay, what do I have to do for this week? What's the most like sensible thing to do for me right now? And you cannot really plan a larger, especially like a larger collaborative project like that. That's gonna be bad. So having to sit down, I already did this a little bit last week, having to sit down and then think about like, okay, what do I have right now? Which parts of the game, how far along are they? For example, I've with dungeon design, I've like put down a dungeon and encounters and boss fights. This stuff is basically done. If this game were to be just dungeons and encounters and boss fights, I could make this game now. I could sit down and say, okay, in 18 months I have that amount of dungeons, that amount of fights, and it will take this long. The game is a bit more than that, and there are other parts to it. And these are like in different states of completion on a conceptual level. So like what I'm right now trying to figure out is like, how far along are each of these elements regarding like with the main question being like, could I make the entire game based like without having to stop for a moment and say, wait a second, what is this supposed to look like anyway? I don't know. And the biggest part there here right now is like the overall like narrative structure and how it's tied to like parts of the game's progression system. That's something I still need to figure out, and I want to figure out fairly soon. And this is like the kind of stuff that I'm building. This doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, but I should have a good idea of like what this is supposed to be. And it's also kind of like on like a plus side, aside from like putting this on a spreadsheet and presenting it to people with money, there is also like a benefit of it in that I then really know, like, once it gets around to like actually making the game regardless of funding, okay, this is how it's gonna work. These structures are in place. I can now just make the thing, basically have something for every part of the game where with like that's in a similar state to like all the the dungeon related stuff, which is like, yeah, I can just make this. I don't have to like build like a specific, like figure out like a specific system for this, or like the systemic makeup for this and how it's attached to other elements or whatever. I can just build the assets and like script the areas and like put everything in place and connect it and know the connections when I connect it, it all works. Like they interact with each other correctly, they flow into each other correctly, and the work then only becomes, in quotes, like the controlling how everything flows into each other and like how all of this works, and like check if it's like in line with what I want this to be, or like you want this to be, and then how it relates to like player experiences, and if like these are aligned or like if they're misaligned, what you can do to adjust these. But the main question right now is like figuring these things out and then like putting it all together and then thinking about like how are you gonna present this to someone with money and present it in such a way that they think, yeah, this is like a sensible commercial project. Again, I think it is. Just on a pure, I think this should exist in its like in the best way possible, and in a way that needs funding, because then I would be able to like focus all of my time on it, which right now doesn't look very likely. And also, you know, having collaborators and having help and all of that also helps, because then I, for example, could only concentrate on the parts of the game that I feel I'm really good at and don't have to like deal with other aspects of it. So there's that part, and also like, you know, I would really like to work with other people. I think it would be fun. So that's anyway, that's all like part of the problem and the process more than the problem, but it's also part of the problem, because it's stuff you need to understand and figure out and see where it goes. Either way, as long as the world at large permits it, which honestly, like, who knows what happens there. But given that everything roughly like works still, as long as that happens, I'm gonna try to do my best to get this game into existence, because I just have like so much cool stuff in my brain that needs to be put somewhere, and that someone has to see, or that I could like have to convince others to like take a look at. Basically, all I want to do with this is like build this very intricate thing. Well, like a lot of different systems are kind of like webbed into each other and like are pushing and pulling from each other, that like through that tells a story and shows characters in different situations and plays with narrative perspective, and also has like things where you can cook monsters into items, or has abilities that like change depending on where on the map you are. And other things where you can turn enemies into slimes, or maybe even turn player characters into slimes, or lick doors even though you wanted to punch them. All of these things that are currently possible. Like, you can cook monsters in this game. It's very mathematical. The other thing I noticed that I find deeply funny is, for some reason, the moment I started making RPGs is the moment I started to like math. Always hated it, but why was it fun to do just like things with numbers, and the numbers tell the joke. It's incredible. Anyway, I think that's enough. Who knows when the next one's gonna be? I don't know. I hope it's interesting. Please buy Witcher 7, write reviews, and all of these other things. But broadly speaking, the buying is enough. If you have time for the other things, that's fine. But the buying helps the most, because the buying is what gives me money. The reviews are nice, but the reviews don't give me extra money. I don't get like a bonus from Steam for getting a positive review on my game. And aside from, like, honestly, aside from engagement on Steam, none of us in this equation is gaining anything, right? Like, or sure, like I get some kind of like tangential, ephemeral algorithm effect maybe on one of my games, but neither the person writing the user reviews gets money out of it, nor do I, only in a very abstract and indirect way. You could make an argument, yeah, the more reviews gives you more visibility, which might then give you potentially, maybe, possibly more sold copies. Yeah, but that's like 5 steps away removed from like the initial step, and all of these steps are all very vague and not very clearly described. It's just like the notion and the idea that this might happen. It's kind of like similar like to working with working for exposure, right? Somehow, I don't know. That's maybe a bit too much. 45 minutes. I should stop. Have a good one. Let's all just, work for the best. We definitely can maybe expect a better world to have than what we have right now, and let's just try to look for ways how to make it happen. And until then, see you around, and yeah, bye everyone.